And so it's up upon you as the leader to understand who they are, what they're about, what's important to them, and really connect. Like if I could go back to the very beginning of like what's important is like connecting with your people so that you understand them. So when you have to get things done through them, you know them first and then you can work with them.
Chad Peterman here, and you are listening to Can't Stop the Growth, a platform for leaders and teams to grow and thrive. We highlight the importance of personal development, pursuing greatness, and always chasing your potential. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to another episode of Can't Stop the Growth. I'm your host, Chad Peterman, and today I have a very special guest on the podcast. If you're like me, building culture is one of the most important things that I do on a daily basis. The culture of our company plays a huge factor in the success of our business. To talk all about building and cultivating the culture vibe within your company, I'm extremely excited to welcome the founder of Skutvik Consulting, co-founder and chief vibe officer, which has got to be the coolest title out there at Work Vibes, Kristi Skutvik. Welcome to the show, Kristi.
Thanks, Chad. I appreciate you having me. I know this is a little bit different take on who your guests normally are, but I'm really appreciative that you have asked me to be here and to kind of share all the goodness that is creating vibes in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a great point, right? It's this one was a little bit more interesting to prepare for, but I can tell you that it's almost more difficult to prepare to talk to someone in the trades industry because you kind of have all the answers. Whereas from this perspective, I think everybody in our industry is always searching for answers, whether it's creating culture or assessing talent or whatever it may be. I think that what you have to offer is going to be extremely beneficial to a number of our listeners for sure.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to share.
Yeah, well, perfect. Well, let's get started. I guess it'd probably be, based on what we just said, probably be a good place to start by telling the listeners a little bit about your background and what you're currently working on.
Sure. So I started, I'll kind of be brief, but take you back to college. So as most, I got out of college thinking, what the heck am I going to do? I think I'm going to be in sales. Yeah, that sounds great. I get to talk to people all day long, and started my journey that way in inside sales. Well, I didn't really know what that meant and what that looked like. And so it wasn't for me. I'll just say that. So I got into corporate recruiting where I was selling a company more than I was selling a product. Which took me into HR, and here I am today. So what I experienced on the corporate side of HR was really how I did things a little bit different, how I looked at the business, understood the people working within the business, and experiences were really important to me. So as I kind of journeyed away from corporate into my own consulting business, that's really what I've kept kind of at the core of who I am, is creating experiences for others through HR. And, your people are kind of at the core of everything that you do, you and every other business out there. And so whether you're making a product and that's what you're selling, or you're providing a service, the people are doing the function to create the revenue. And so what I've really taken to heart is, what are those experiences along the journey of an employee from hire to retire that create the vibe within the workplace? So before engagement or vibes or, these terms were kind of thrown around, it's always been really important to me because we spend so much time at work with people that why be miserable? And there's so many people that are. And as leaders, we have the ability to create the environments that create the experiences for those to share and connect and do the things that they love and are passionate about.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit. So obviously, I kind of started out by talking about culture. You kind of refer to it as vibes, which I love. Tell us a little bit about that, like that word vibe. Like what does that mean? What do people take from that? Let's start there, and I think we can
Sure.
We'll have plenty of questions from there for sure.
Well, in my mind, the word culture and engagement just come with so many feelings. that as I was thinking through, like, what really are we trying to talk about or define, the word vibe kept coming up for me because I really think that everyone can relate to that. You walk into Starbucks, you walk into Nordstrom, you walk into any place where you go and shop or receive a service. And there is an energy within that space that creates the feeling or experience that you have. And so that's how I really define what a vibe is. And I think that more people can relate to that word and relate to those experiences than they can engagement or culture, because those two words in my mind create feelings that are all over the place that aren't defined with a common thread in them. They're either good or bad. They say, oh, engagement. Yeah, my employer tries to do that and they don't know what they're talking about. They just throw around the word. Same with culture, right? It's like they just throw around the word and they don't really know what culture is. They think culture is just being in the office or having snacks for us, right? So the word vibe feels more, I guess you could say, like inclusive and common versus dividing and misunderstanding.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a great point, and I appreciate you saying it like that. I think it's something that I've looked at, over the years and I've always said, culture is a verb. And so it's active and you're looking to create it. And I think that goes along with how you're looking at it is like, I think so many people are too tied to the snack room, the break room, the snacks,
Yes,
the ping pong table. It's like, well, like if you just
exactly.
do that, you're missing the point.
Exactly. Exactly. And Chad, I was just looking back at the podcast that you and I recorded together for my podcast, and you talk about like the little things, right? That create the vibe or the culture among your people. And it's the little things over time. So
Yeah.
people have to see things consistently and over time and small micro moments that matter in order for them to have a belief that the behaviors that the leadership is showing is actually care and concern for them, right? So you just changing a behavior one time as a leader doesn't change the belief of the people who work for you. And that's really what's going to drive the vibe, right? Is that belief system that's been created based on the behaviors.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, we talk about it in marketing and we're okay with it. Like marketing, like, well, you're going to have to be out in front of your customer, 7 different times before they actually know what you do. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, you're selling to your people that are
Yes.
currently working in the building. So you're going to have to do the same darn thing.
Exactly. Exactly. And when organizations go through spending all this time, money, and putting resources towards external marketing to their customers, I tell them, don't forget the piece of like all that work that you've done, turn it inside. And what can you take from that to promote inside to your people and create the same experience or similar experience of what you're trying to create externally, internally also?
Yeah.
Because if
No,
those people are feeling it internally and that message is consistent from the experience that the clients receive and when they're interacting with your people, and then what you're promoting externally, gosh, imagine the possibilities that are out there for the productivity and just the client satisfaction, really.
yeah, absolutely. What one of the things that I came across as I was kind of prepping for this episode was this term "quiet quitting," and I think it goes along with engagement and how do we get people more engaged and what's actually happening when we look at turnover rate and retention and all of this stuff. Talk to me a little bit about how you guys look at that, and then I guess more so, how do people address this kind of phenomenon that I think people often overlook?
I think when, there are many organizations out there or leaders out there that are like, my people are fine, my people are fine, my people are fine, but they really haven't connected with them to see if they are fine or what fine means, right? And so quiet quitting is like they're just doing what they need to do, but there's a lack of connection and engagement. So, and I'll use the word connection quite a bit because we are in a situation where the Surgeon General has named loneliness far more dangerous than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So
Wow.
we have this disconnection issue all over the place, right? I mean, the workplace is a big component of that, but it's all over the place. So when you think about quiet quitting, it's people are just completely disconnected. They're punching the time clock, they're coming in, they're doing their thing, but they're not connecting with people. They're not feeling a sense of purpose, and they're really not connecting with like the bigger mission and purpose of the organization. So they're just putting in their time until you either fire them or they find something better. But they're present, they're doing something, but they've really quit before they've quit.
What would you tell, okay, if I've identified that, oh shoot, this may be an issue, like
Mhm.
not everybody's connecting to the why, they don't understand the mission, they feel like they're kind of a cog in the wheel. What are
Mhm.
things that you recommend to people like, hey, here's where you could start? It may not solve everything, but at least it's a step in the right direction for kind of, I guess, solving this.
So the first thing I tell people always is don't overthink it. Like keep it super simple. We have to go back to the basics of like human interaction. And I know we've lost some of that in this, during the pandemic when everything went remote, we weren't connecting with people in person. But if you have an opportunity to get in front of people, make eye contact with people, I was talking with a friend the other day and she was like, oh my gosh, it's so annoying. The new company I'm at, they always want your video on. And I said, well, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I mean, given that you're all kind of dispersed around the US, I think it's really important for people to look each other, in the eye to make the connection and have a conversation. And she's like, it's just so annoying. So really, I think it's like bringing it back to the basics, like connect with your people. If you can't do it in person, then make sure that you're picking up the phone, you're sending them a text message, a video text message to let them know that they came to mind, you thought about them, you care about them. If you know a little something personal about them or they were doing something with their kids over the weekend, just start talking with them about that. Like be purposeful in your communication and showing care and concern for your people first, and then get to the other things because they will value that a lot.
No, and we talked about that on your show is, leadership, it can be very complex and very like, oh, I don't know if I'm a leader. I don't know how to do this. Well, it's my belief that within each of us, you can be a leader if you genuinely care about another person. That's what
Yes.
leadership is. It's service to others. And so I think that's a great point and a place where people can start is that, no longer is care and compassion for your people just signing their paycheck on Friday.
Right.
That it's not a thing. Like my dad still believes that. And I'm sure many in his generation still believe that and hold true to that. But there's more to it. And I think
Mhm.
too that one of the questions I want to ask you is dealing with, the millennials and the generation after them, which I don't know the name of offhand. But, I've always tried to tell our people that we have to meet them where they are. So if something works for us but doesn't work for them, like we can hold strong in our values and our beliefs and how things should be. But if they never get that, then they're not going to want to work here. How do you kind of teach people to kind of navigate between those generational gaps? I think that's one of the things we struggle with. We've got a lot of people that have been in the trades for ever and a day, and then we got this
Mhm.
new group coming in that is learning and trying to figure things out, and then
Sure.
trying to get them to understand each other.
Yeah. So be curious, ask questions. I think as a leader, being vulnerable is really important. And, you could be the first to say, like, I don't get it. It sounds like you want X, Y, and Z, and I don't quite understand how that would even work in this environment. They might have really good ideas about how it could work because they want it bad enough. Like their why is big enough to drive them to a creative idea that actually might serve you and serve them. So as a leader, we don't have all the answers and we don't know everything that drives every single person. It's an idea that I often talk to leaders about when people talk about flexibility. They think there's many leaders that just simply think flexibility is the ability to work from home. And that's not it.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. When you think about, or when I think about culture, and then I think about the word accountability, at first glance, they seem to counteract each other. Like, oh, shoot, how are we going to introduce accountability? And, do people want it? Do they not? Are they, whatever it is. Like, what's your advice for, hey, I think I've got a really great culture, but I need to have some accountability within the organization. It can't be all, rainbows and butterflies and all of this stuff. Like, we actually have to get something done. What's your advice for people that are maybe struggling with that, or, are torn on how to implement that?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to what you were saying, Chad, of like meeting people where they're at, right? So accountability is a little bit different depending on the knowledge that people have in the industry or the job that they're doing, and the experience that they bring to the table, and the confidence that they have to carry out what you're asking them to do. So when I think about accountability, there's some people who think that means micromanaging somebody. And then there's some people that say, I gave it to them and then they didn't do it. Like, what the heck? Right. And so everybody wants a level of autonomy to be trusted and go carry out the task that they've been given to be able to do. But not everybody knows how to do it, when they need to do it by, who they need to include in the process, unless they have the years of experience to warrant that. So I see kind of different levels of accountability within an organization or within a group, depending on the level of experience and the level of knowledge somebody has. And leaders need to look at the person or the group of people and understand who they are so that they can clearly communicate the amount of detail that they need to in order to give them the autonomy to go do the thing that they've asked them to do, and then to follow up on that at the appropriate time frame based on what they believe they need, the experience and the skills that they have. So, for example, if you have a new person starting with your organization, they may have the skills in order to carry out the task, but they may not know the way you do it, the systems that you use, et cetera, right? So in order to hold them accountable, you might have to be a little bit more prescriptive in the first 30, 60, 90 days about how they do it versus what they do. And then after they've been trained and you've kind of imparted your knowledge on them of the way your organization does it, then the next time around, you can give them more autonomy to just go carry out the task without kind of explaining every step of the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense to me. As far as, when I think about what you just said, it's like, how do I really get clear on the why behind, here's why we are doing what I am telling you to do. And then there's varying degrees of instruction that need to be given. It's
exactly.
Hey, make sure everybody knows the why. And then you, sir, you've been doing this, a long time. So I basically just need to give you these hows and you should be able to carry it out. Whereas you just started and are new to the industry. So I'm going to have to give you a lot more hows on how to do that. And the how can always change. It's different for different people, but the why has got to be consistent.
Exactly. And think about it, I often do this, but I have 3 kids. And so I often relate it to my kids, and they're different ages. And so I can explain to all 3 of them why we're doing something, but I have to give them different instruction because they have different life experience based on their age. I mean, that's like in the simplest terms, right? It's like my 9-year-old doesn't know all the things my 14-year-old does. And then my 11-year-old is a boy and he has different life experiences than my 2 girls, right? And is at a different age. So I have to explain things slightly different, same why we're doing it, but slightly different, kind of knowing who they are in order for them to go out and do the thing I've asked them to do.
Yeah. So I want to get your take on this because I appreciate you bringing up that example of parenting. So I know in our industry, the parenting analogy can get demeaning to a certain degree because parenting is often linked with, oh yeah, just babysitting everybody I got here. Whereas to me, I think the parenting analogy works with, similar to the example that you gave, is that, with our kids, we ask questions because we're curious. We explain the why behind everything, maybe multiple times, but we just expect it because they're kids. But the reason, just because they're younger, it's more so they just don't understand. And I think too, our people sometimes don't understand why we're doing things, because as leaders, oftentimes these ideas are just baking up in our head. And it's like, oh, well, shouldn't you understand? It's like, well, no, they haven't spent the last 3 days thinking about said thing. And you just gave them a 2-sentence explanation as to why we're doing it.
Totally. And it's not babysitting, right? It's just really understanding. So I get that too, because I've had leaders who have come to me and like, I don't want to babysit. I don't want to parent at work because I parent enough at home, right? I use that as an example of like each person that you're interacting with who's on your team is really at a different stage of the game. And so it's upon you as the leader to understand who they are, what they're about, what's important to them, and really connect. Like if I could go back to the very beginning of like what's important is like connecting with your people so that you understand them. So when you have to get things done through them, you know them first and then you can work with them. And that's really the important piece of it all.
Yeah, I think that's, I completely agree. Well, I'd like to get your opinion on this. So we are big on one-on-one meetings. So sitting down with your people, going over, just checking in, seeing how things are going, seeing where I can help and all of this. And mainly because a lot of our managers are managing people that they don't see every day because they're out in a customer home or wherever it may be. What's your take on kind of the power of the one-on-one meeting and what that can help bring to the table? And then also maybe on the flip side of that, because I know that we get pushback from our managers because I think that we haven't taught them yet how to have an effective one-on-one. So they don't see the value in it. What are some of the pitfalls that you've seen too? So I guess first, two-parter, what's your take on one-on-ones and their importance? And then two, maybe not so much the pitfalls, but maybe things to avoid or the things to be aware of to hold an effective one-on-one.
So I believe one-on-ones are super important. And I think the way you approach them is what will make them successful or what will make people dread them. So I do believe that again, it's another connection point with you'll probably start seeing a theme here of like connecting, right? But it's another connection point with your people. And sometimes you're having a bad day or they're having a bad day. So don't go into a one-on-one with like, this is exactly how it has to run. And yes, you should have a loose agenda of like what you are looking to cover. But if you're sensing or noticing that your person on the other side of that one-on-one is having a bad day or just, had to put their dog down or their kid's really sick or they were just really sick, like be human first. Ask them how they're doing. Do they need anything? Is it, do they want to talk about anything? Like, what's happening, because that is going to drive the next part of the conversation, which is the work piece of it, right? So, and sometimes you're going to spend that one-on-one time just talking personal because that's what's important at that moment. And I think that's okay. We have to get outside of our thinking of like, it has to be this, this, and this. We have to check the box that it's all work and no play and no fun, and we're not human, right? We're human first. And then once we get that, and again, they feel cared about and that you personally know what's going on in their life, then you can move on to the next thing. And that won't be every time, but you got to observe what's happening and ask about it instead of overlooking it.
I think that is so powerful. And I asked the question because we had just got done, our managers were asking for, I need to know how to have a one-on-one. And so we built them kind of a loose agenda, but I'm going to walk when we're done with this, I'm going to walk down to the person that's creating this and I'm going to say at the top, what I want you to put in big bold letters is be human first.
Yes.
And then follow the agenda.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And sometimes it's because people want to follow instruction, right? So if you're going to give them something, they're innately going to want to follow whatever you've given them. And sometimes people take that too far. Yeah. So again, like bring it back to the basics. Like if you're having a conversation with your neighbor and you see them crying, are you just going to be like, oh, so how's the construction project going on your house? No, you're probably going to be like, are you okay? So just take that same concept and apply it to your people. They're all human.
Yeah. Well, and I think it goes to the point of, the work-life balance and all of this stuff and thinking about them as two compartmentalized things. It's
Mhm.
like, no,
Mhm.
just act like you would act on, a Friday evening with your friends. Just act like that with your coworkers when it comes
Yeah.
to what's going
Yeah.
on in your life. I care about you just like you care about your
Yeah.
friends. I think that's a great
Yeah.
example of, your friend comes over crying. You're not going to be like, well, let's get down to the agenda here that we had set
Right.
for this, glass of
Yeah.
wine this afternoon. Like, come on.
Exactly, exactly. So it's so funny to me that we've created, and I've done this too, that we've created environments where we treat it differently, right? Because I think we've been told, and this is generational stuff, the boomers have been kind of told to separate things. And like you go to work and you do the thing, and then you leave and you have your family, and that's just separate and apart. But we've come to a place where things are hugely integrated. And so we have to be aware that that's what's happening, and then have to understand how we go about that as a leader with that integrated work and life.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and especially the examples, because I think that makes it really easy to digest when thinking about that human connection, how we work with the people on our team,
Mhm.
and how we ultimately support them in their growth, which I think is critical.
And
One
I'll
of the
say
things.
one more thing about
Go ahead.
one-on-one. Sorry to interrupt
No,
you.
you're good. Yeah, go
Is
ahead.
I also don't think, and I'm not sure what this looks like in your organization, but I also don't think that one-on-ones have to be done sitting down at a desk. So if there's an opportunity to like go for a walk with somebody, or go get outside and sit at a table and get some fresh air, like I think that is really, really healthy to do and really helpful. So, think about like alternative ways besides just kind of sitting down and doing the thing that you
Yeah.
feel like you have to do, right? It kind of breaks the barrier of getting people to talk.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I know that a lot of our guys, if they're out with a guy, they're in the truck, they're chatting it up and talking about it. Conversation becomes a little bit more natural. If
Totally.
you're in the car, well, that's what you do. If someone's sitting there, you talk to them. Everybody
Right.
can remember those awkward silences where you're like, "Oh shoot, who's going to talk
Yes.
next? This is weird." Well, one thing I wanted to talk to you about and pick your brain on, because I think, at least from personal experience, as we built out kind of our HR department and what that looked like and how we were supporting people and, making sure that policies and procedures were in place. I think it is a totally different area. And I think probably for most business
Mhm.
owners, they know how to do the thing, they know the operational piece. But as we talked about earlier, in some instances, especially in ours, our product is our people. That's what we're selling. Talk to me a little bit about kind of the one of the things we learned, and I'll share a little bit about our experience. But when it comes to onboarding, so we find a new person, they're going to be great for our team. Tell me a little bit about the importance of onboarding and how that's going to set people up for success. Because, and the reason I want you to say a little bit on it is I feel like so many people overlook that when it
Mhm.
comes to what their culture is all about and setting
Yeah.
the tone for new people.
I mean, that's just exactly what it is. It's setting the tone. So, and it starts with the minute the person finds out about your organization. So, when they see the job posting, or when they are referred by a friend, or when however you're kind of marketing to the external world, that you're starting to create that experience already, right? And then through the recruitment process, you have another experience that you've created. And hopefully there's continuity between what they saw online or heard from a friend to the experience while they're interviewing, and then day one. And then they start. And I will say the majority of organizations are terrible at onboarding. They say, oh, they started and we gave them a computer, or maybe we didn't. Maybe the technology isn't. I have such a hard time with organizations that are like, oh, we don't have their computer on the first day. I'm like, it's 2024. Like, what are we doing? Like, why? That should be an expectation, right? So I think, making sure that they feel welcomed, just like somebody walking into your house. So they feel welcomed and they know what to expect. So the last thing somebody wants is to flounder, because then they feel like, well, did they really mean to? They start questioning, right? We as human beings create a story in our head when there's a lack of information. We fill in those gaps. And so the last thing you want a new hire to do is fill in the gaps. You want to create the story of your organization, of why they should be there, why you hired them, what their purpose is, what they're going to be doing next, what they can expect. Set expectations around things like, what happens if my computer crashes or my technology doesn't work, right? Think about like the key things so that they might run into, or roadblocks or obstacles that they might run into, and then answer those questions for them before they happen. So they're not left kind of figuring it out or stumbling along. It's like we've thought of all the things that could be because we've experienced them before, and we want to make sure it's as smooth as possible for you. So here's the answers to all your questions, right? Here's the mentor or buddy or person who you're going to be connected to who can answer some of those things for you. So they don't always have to go to their leader, because I've heard a lot from people saying, oh, my leader's unavailable, or they're so busy, I don't want to bother them. That's a big one. So connect them with somebody that they can, quote unquote, bother, right? Or they don't feel like they're bothering, but has been down this road before and can answer some of those questions that they might deem as dumb or stupid, or, whatever somebody's created in their head. But really anticipate the obstacles that they will have and have those ready for them before they come. So you're like, we've thought through everything. And then, kind of 30 days in, 60 days in, 90 days in, check in with them, and then make sure that if there is an issue that they're experiencing, or there is some feedback that they have, that you take that into consideration, either adjust it for them so they know that you're, why are you asking me any questions if you're not going to fix the problem? But again, keep it simple. Like, I don't overdo it with grandiose videos. I mean, if you're the leader and you can't meet with them one-on-one on the first day, send them a video text message. Like, it's not hard. Don't overthink it, but connect with them.
Yeah, no, I think that that's so powerful. I really, really like the idea, because I often hear this too. It's like we give them a book, and our team, our HR and recruiting team has done we used to be terrible. When I was in charge of HR, it was, hey, how much experience you got? Here's your keys, jump on the van. We got some calls to run this afternoon. Let's go get after it. And, they've really done a phenomenal job building out kind of a robust onboarding program. And I make it to almost all of them. I sit down and talk with them on day one with the group. And what I always tell them is, don't be overwhelmed. We're going to give you a lot of information. But the idea that I really like that you mentioned was creating kind of a mentor program, maybe within their department, because we are going to give them a lot of information. And usually when they need it, it's 6 months, a year down the road. And it's like, oh, shoot, I forgot that. Now, where do I go? As opposed to giving them access to, their first friend in the organization that they can call and say, hey, I don't want to look silly, but like, how do I do this again? And someone can tell them, and they can, move along. And they don't want to tell their manager that they don't know, and so on and so forth. So I think that that's a really great idea. But definitely would emphasize as well to all the listeners out there is the onboarding program is so critical. One of the other things that we do that I think is really cool is the recruiter that recruited them sends them, hey, we have a 30, 60, and 90-day check-in with the recruiter. Awesome. And then also they send them notes and different things like that, just because that's the first person they ever met in the organization.
Sure.
So that's probably who, like, they remember that person, right? So that's been huge for us.
It's another thing too that has been beneficial for some organizations that I work with. And again, this could be generational. Is that like micro learning? So like 2 to 5 minute little videos of like the key questions. So if you start to gather like the key questions new hires have, or key things within the onboarding experience, you could make an internal YouTube channel or some sort of intranet or something like that, where you index these videos, right? So there's different topics, but they're like 2 minutes long, and somebody could watch it think about like if you're trying to fix something at your house and you're like, I don't want to call a repairman, or I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do that. And so you YouTube it and it's like a 2-minute video and you're like, oh my gosh, that was so simple. Like it took me maybe 20 minutes in total to figure it out. And then I can move on. So I think that is like, talk about meeting people where they're at as the workforce, the different generations start entering the workforce is like different learning methods. So maybe they don't want to pick up the phone and call somebody, but they will go on the site and watch the 2-minute video and then boom, they can move forward.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's crazy to think that I still remember in high school, like with the dial-up internet that you had to get on, and now everybody's everybody's phone is their own kind of directory, and you can figure out anything in about 5 seconds, which is crazy.
Yeah.
When you think about HR, and I'm sure you've ran into multitudes of companies that are just completely lost. Like, I don't even know what's going on. I mean, we were this way for a long time. What is your kind of suggestion for people that maybe run smaller businesses that are like, I don't have an HR department. Like, we're just trying to, make it work. What would you recommend to them as like some good places to start to like, okay, make sure you have this in order at least to a certain degree? Like I guess just some rough knowledge, because I know people are struggling with that out there.
Yeah. So I always start with like, okay, if you look at your employee experience, hire to retire, what are the key like processes and experiences within that? And then what is your operational infrastructure? Like, if nothing else, start with like the operational infrastructure, because it's like building a house with no foundation if you don't have that. So you have to have a good foundation of like people, processes, and systems to support anything else that you do. So you were mentioning like when you first started, with your business and getting in there and kind of digging in, it was a little bit of a mess, but you have to start with those things and processes before you can start, really building the vibe within the organization. Because if those aren't solid, anything you do is going to be on shaky ground and people aren't going to take it seriously. There might be a couple, but the minute like, competition enters the marketplace or a key person leaves, it's just going to crumble to the ground. So that's where I would tell people to start. It's like outlining, okay, when I post an ad, this is what's in the ad, and this is who I'm trying to recruit. And then this is what happens next. And it goes into a system or it goes into a general, you know what I mean? So like start outlining and defining those processes from beginning to end from a people standpoint, and then build on those.
I think that's great advice. I'm reading a book right now that's by a former Navy SEAL, and a lot of the talk in there is go slow to go fast.
Yes.
Like just slow it down. Yes, it takes a little bit more time to kind of write out the process and think through it and so on and so forth. But in the end, the more of those you do, and while it took you 20 minutes, it won't take you any time in the future because you already have that built.
Exactly. So I live in California. So, and I know In-N-Out is other places, but Lindsay Snyder, who's the now president or CEO of In-N-Out, wrote a book, and she talked a lot about their slow growth at In-N-Out for that exact reason. Is like, we want the right people in the right seats with the right training, clearly understanding what it's going to take for them to come in at the entry level and build the organization. And we do that because we want people with the depth of knowledge of who we are and what we're about and kind of living and breathing In-N-Out. And so they practice that same thing as go slow to go fast.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Well, Kristi, I want to be respectful of time. Obviously, we had a few technical difficulties at the beginning.
All good.
But as we close out here, I guess, what would you want to leave with listeners as like, hey, this is kind of, I know you're running, Work Vibes and you're consulting, or like, what is like your, like, this is the message I want to get to people as it relates to kind of building culture and then sustaining that, finding the right people, putting them in the right seats. Like, what's your kind of, this is my grandstand pitch. Like, please listen. If you don't hear anything else, hear this.
So there's two things is, keep it simple and connect with your people. That's it. If you are doing that, you're going to be so much better off and farther ahead than people who aren't doing that. Don't analyze data until you're blue in the face and miss the point to connect with your people. It's as simple as that.
Well, that's perfect. That advice too is simple. I like that. I can follow that. Kristi, if people want to get in touch with you to learn more about what you're doing with the organizations that you're leading or the podcast that you host, like what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Sure. So people are welcome to listen to the podcast. It's Vibecast on all the different platforms. And then Kristi at Skutvik Consulting, and we'll have that spelled out for you. It's a mouthful. And SkutvikConsulting.com and getworkvibes.com. Work Vibes is really about building vibes in the workplace. And then if you want to set up the infrastructure in order to build the vibes, Skutvik Consulting is my HR consulting firm. So we're kind of all close the loop on the continuum.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad that we met. It's probably been a month or so ago, and I got the opportunity to be on your podcast. And thanks for what you're doing out there. I think it's extremely, extremely impactful, and we're working every day to try to improve ours. And it's never going to be perfect, but we can always make it better. So
awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to kind of share the good word, if you will, and spread the vibes.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Can't Stop the Growth. We hope that you found today's discussion inspiring and informative as we explored strategies, insights, and stories that fuel personal and professional growth. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to leave us a review to let us know what you think. Remember, growth is a journey, and it's all about taking small steps forward each and every day. Keep pushing yourself, embracing new challenges, and never stop striving for progress. Until next time, keep growing, keep learning, and remember, you can't stop the growth. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to get connected, you can find me at chadmpeterman.com. To see what our team's up to, you can visit petermanbros.com. As always, keep growing out there.